Hello, Year 4. Mrs. Smith back to read The Time Travelling Cat, Chapter 13. It was later that doubt set in. Later, as he flew through mile after mile of nothingness, and the stars seemed as far away as ever. What had old Charlie said? If you travel to the stars, you'll come back younger than when you went. Did he want to be younger? Did he want to be a baby? What if he went back further than that, to when he was a nothing? It was a horrific thought. More followed. Was he getting younger? He wished he could see himself. How much younger did he have to be to find Ka in Bubastis in ancient Egypt? Wasn't that thousands of years ago? Who would he be in ancient Egypt? For surely he couldn't be nothing. And where would he be? And who with? As the bird flew on, onward, to the past, the questions in his mind grew more frenzied. He wanted Ka, yes he did, but didn't he want her on his bed, in the kitchen, or by the front doorstep? Was he going to the past to fetch her back, or, horrors, would he have to stay there forever? Suddenly, the enormity of what was happening overwhelmed him, and Topher longed for home. But the falcon was flying even faster, it seemed, and the wind was sucking at his pyjamas like a vacuum cleaner, and there was something ahead, several somethings. One of them whizzed past him, a lump of molten rock, and the stars did seem nearer. They shone more brightly, and he could see more strange objects, showers of sparks and spheres with fiery tails. Further away he saw the planets circling, and he longed for ordinariness. He longed for his dad, and he longed for Ellie, and he was hurtling away from them. And the wind was colder and stronger now. It seemed to be trying to blast him off the falcon's back. Topher clung on, his arms around the bird's neck, as its wings beat furiously. He was scared now, very scared. He didn't know where he was going or whether he would ever get back. Icy fear sliced through him. Then the wind dropped and his pyjama jacket was floating gently, tickling his skin. It was silent again, so silent he could hear his own heart thumping, hear the blood racing through his veins. He forced himself to breathe deeply and slowly, and he could hear the air swooshing through his nostrils, filling his lungs, and his heartbeat slowed as he hoped it would. It was a good trick, which his mom had taught him. He breathed in again and let his breath slowly, heard his finger joints click as he relaxed to hold on the bird's neck. He breathed in again, slowly, deeply, felt calmer now. He was still afraid, but fear wasn't filling him. Curious too, he wondered where he was. It was getting lighter. He was glad of that, even though he wasn't afraid of the dark. He had been when he was younger, so maybe he wasn't getting younger. He was glad of that too. Feeling tired, he leaned forward a little, rested his head on the falcon's soft feathers, and closed his eyes. Just for a moment. But he must have slept, for when he opened his eyes, things had changed. It was lighter still, and there was something ahead, a huge luminous ball. It was strange, and yet familiar. It was, of course, Earth. He'd left Earth, and he was coming back to Earth, the planet Earth, looking amazingly like the globe in the corner of his classroom at St. Saviour's, except there was no shelf beneath it, no stand for it to spin on. Then what did it spin on? The colours were different too. It wasn't a faded blue with yellow and green bits and black writing. It was a deep blue, with an even deeper blue showing the land masses, and they were becoming clearer all the time. They were changing colour by the second, because the falcon was in fact zooming towards the earth, its wing beat so fast that they were flickering haze in the corner of his eye. And as he looked ahead, blue became green, became brown, with lines appearing and dots. They must have flown in a curve around the other side, for now there was more light from the sun, and now he could see the continents, sprawling Asia, and coming into view the bulge of Africa, miles of sand and a river on the right-hand side, branching like a tree. Africa, of course, he was heading for Africa, getting closer by the second. Egypt was in Africa, and that river that looked like a tree, it was the Nile. Now his head felt muzzy as if it had once been when he'd had gas at the dentist, and it was dark again. He glanced around. The falcon's wings were trembling with the effort of staying still. The bird was slowing itself, breaking, trying to pull itself back. Then an outstretched wing it was descending again, down, 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 towards a flat rooftop in a small settlement surrounded by palm trees and flat bare fields. Bump! The bird landed. It lowered its rump, and Topher slid down its tail feathers to a whitewashed roof terrace. He was in the past. For a few seconds he knew that he'd left the future behind. He was Topher, and he wasn't Topher. He was no longer Topher Hope, and he felt very, very tired. Chapter 14. Then he was waking up, as if after a deep sleep, rubbing his eyes with one hand, holding a cloth round his middle with another. Through his fingers he could see the streaked dawn sky, purple and indigo with palm trees silhouetted against the horizon. He could hear honking ducks and shrieking ibis, see them if he stood on tiptoe, flocks of them on the flat dark earth. Something was worrying him, but he couldn't remember what. He didn't feel quite himself. Frondy leaves tickled his legs. He needed the lavatory. Perhaps that's what it was. He would have to go downstairs. Making his way to the outside steps, he glanced over the wall to the next-door neighbour's house. Nobody there was up yet, not even their noisy children, though Aten the sun god was. A crimson dawn on the horizon, he was flooding the dawn sky with pink and gold, making the wet earth shimmer. Already slaves were in the fields. He could hear the plink-plink of their wooden hoes and the high cry of ibis wheeling above them. The recent flood had subsided quite quickly. It had been a good flood, high enough to cover the fields with silt, but not so high as to damage the houses and dikes. There would be a rich harvest. Thanks be to the gods. He hurried up. What was the matter with him? His stomach ached, always a sign that he was worried about something. Good. Here was the lav, next to his parents' quarters. It didn't smell today. The sand beneath the painted seat was fresh. He knew he was lucky to live in a house like this, to have a bed with a mattress and linen sheets. Then why hadn't he slept in his? His parents were important people. That's why they had these things. His father was a scribe, a rich man, and his mother, he didn't exactly know what she did, but she was important too. Sometimes she went away. She had to, she said. But she was home now. He could see her, through a curtain. He could see both of them in their bed with its feet shaped like lion's paws. They were asleep, his father's shaved head and his mother's cropped one on their padded headrests. Why hadn't he slept in his own bed last night? Topher, is that you? Yes, mother. Her headrest clattered to the floor. Why are you up so early, Topher? I don't know. Go back to bed then. Yes, mother. Then she was sitting up, anxious. Topher, did you find Car? That was it. He'd been looking for the house cat. No, mother. He watched her, but she didn't let her see him. She would hate that. Without her makeup on, she looked like a ghost. With her makeup, her eyes were like a cat's. But now her skin was pale and puffy, with wrinkles at the eye edges. She was frowning, seemed worried about the house cat, and so of course was he. But not his father, snoring beside her. Now memory returned, and anger rose like sick in his throat. His father, Chris, wasn't worried, and yet he knew. He was a scribe. He'd seen the sacred papyrus. And Topher knew. He had seen the sacred papyrus. The knowledge pressed down on him like a tombstone. He shouldn't have looked, shouldn't have read the hieroglyphs. It had happened yesterday when his father had taken him to his workplace. You could be an apprentice scribe one day, he'd said. You could copy out the sacred text like me. Then he'd been called away for just a few moments, leaving Topher with the secret of Bastet in front of him. And he'd read it, learned the threat it held for Car. That's why he slept on the roof. He'd been looking for her, wanted to save her. He glanced through the curtain, saw his mother still in bed, but now putting on her thick black wig. He went in. She held out both hands. He told her he feared Car had drowned in the mud, or that her hyena had got her. She shuddered, shook her head, said he mustn't worry, said it again, you mustn't worry, and she stroked his cheek, gently scratching him with her long fingernails. Was she worried about Car? She seemed more worried about him now. Yet she adored Car and Car had adored her. Didn't Car deserve their worry? These things happen, you know, Topher. It's the will of the gods. You must accept it. Saying this, she looked him straight in the eyes, and he had a terrible thought. Did she know too? He tried to read her face, but she turned away and was getting out of bed. And his father was stirring. Topher saw the two of them exchange a look. It seemed heavy with meaning. Did they both know? He needed to think, but he must watch and listen too. His father was speaking now. It can be an honour, you know, Topher, to lose the house cat. So he had been awake, listening. He went on. Besides, no real harm can come to Car, you know. She has the lucky ankh, remember? How could he forget? The sacred ankh, the sign of life which adorned her forehead. For as long as he could remember, people had always said she was a lucky cat, that she could be the goddess Bastet herself. Poor unlucky Car, for he knew exactly what his father meant. He'd seen it written down. It could be an honour to lose the house cat if she had been chosen, if she had been taken to the temple of Bubastis. If broken-necked and wearing a cloth of gold, she were to be paraded through the streets of Bubastis, to be cheered by the gullible crowds of the goddess Bastet herself. He had to save Car from that. Chapter 15. He couldn't tell anyone. To have read the sacred text was a profanity. Even to think of stopping the sacred rite was to risk death. But he must rescue Car. He must go back to Bubastis. He was sure she was there by now. Who had taken her? She had been missing for a whole day and the festival of Bastet was imminent. That's when she would be killed, on the day of the festival, at sunset. He went again to the rooftop. He needed to be alone to think, but the children next door were playing in their roof garden. Narma, who was 4, saw him. Rrrr! He was pulling a toy lion which snapped its jaw when it jerked the string. Rrrr! Come on over, Topher. No, sorry. He felt mean because he was Narma's favourite, a pretend big brother, but he couldn't think with him there. He would have to go downstairs again. Fortunately, he went by the outside staircase, for passing his parents' window he heard something which stopped him in his tracks. Crouching, he listened. Bubastis. He had heard right. They were going there. Both of them were, though previously only his mother had planned to. But this year, as they had been honoured, so they both did know. Topher felt sick, but kept his wits about him, and soon heard something which made his heart thump faster. I'm worried about Topher, that was his mother. I think he knows something he shouldn't. What do you mean? You know what I mean. How could he? I don't know, but he's acting oddly. He was too fond of the cat, Chris. Too fond. There was a pause. Then his father's voice again. Maybe we should take him with us. Keep an eye, of course. Don't be stupid, his mother hissed. Topher's mind raced. They were going to Bubastis. Carr was involved. Then they must take him with them. Silently, he moved away from the window, crept down the remaining steps, planning. A few moments later, whistling cheerfully, he walked past their door. Slaves were helping them dress. Ah, Topher, his father saw him. Here a moment. We're going away tomorrow to Bubastis. Here was his chance, so soon. It was up to him now. Oh, can I come? The Feast of Bastet, is it? He must sound keen, but give no hint of his real reason for wanting to go. Mossy said it was great fun. His parents took him last year. He said the journey was hilarious and the food and drink were fantastic, especially the food. He laughed. So did they. Mossy was very fat. Then once again they looked at each other, excluding him. In the corner of the room the water clock dripped. His mother, he thought, was shaking her head, but his father was smiling and seemed to be dismissing her worries. Good. Why not? Chris put his arms round them both. It will be a family outing. When he'd left the room, Topher raced round to the window again and heard his father say, I think you're wrong, Ty. He didn't even mention the cat just then. So far, so good. Preparation had already begun. The packing, special foods to take with them, but there was more to do. His mother said Topher and his father should have new clothes. There was much discussion. Should Topher have a long robe like a man's or a short one like a boy's? A short one, she decided this year. She put her arm round him, drew him close to her, for you must run around and enjoy yourself at the festival. You're still a boy, you know, and you mustn't think so much. The robe maker came with his measuring rod and his rolls of cloth. Topher looked cheerful, and he didn't mention Carr. But that night he dreamed about her. It was a terrible dream. He failed to save her, and he cried out with the misery of it. I tried to save you, Carr. I tried. The cry woke him and his mother, though at first he didn't recognise her standing by the side of his bed. With her bare head and pale night shift, she looked like a ghost. What's the matter, Topher? He shook his head. Tell me. She knelt by his bed and touched his cheek, and he longed to tell her, but the words wouldn't come. In the morning he thought he'd remembered her leaving his room and wondered what she'd heard. He tried to look cheerful, eager to be off. He was eager to be off, too anxious to eat breakfast, but he said he was too excited to eat, and his father laughed and said there would be plenty to eat later, but his mother said he should eat something now. His father left the table, but when Topher tried to leave, she restrained him, a hand on his. But she didn't make him eat. She wanted him to promise, she said, that when they got to Bubastis he wouldn't do anything stupid. On the word stupid, she held his gaze with her green cat eyes, and he said lightly that of course he wouldn't do anything stupid. But that wasn't enough, she said. He must promise. So he promised, because what he was going to do, or try to do, wasn't stupid. It was essential. And she seemed pleased, became bright and brisk, hugged him, said she knew he was a sensible boy, and they must hurry now. The barge, it seemed, was waiting. He said, great, and I'm really looking forward to it, and she hoped she couldn't read his mind. She did keep him close to her as they left the house. She'd been away so much lately, she said. It was so nice to have time to talk to him. He didn't know what to say. Fortunately, once they got into the street, he didn't have to say anything. They were joined by so many others, mostly grown-up, a few families but not many children, all making their way to the river where the barge was waiting. Already they could hear shouts from the small harbour, smell fish and tar. Chris went off quite soon, saying he must say hello to old Nachti. They didn't see him again until they reached the river, and he hailed them from the boarding stage. It was all very jolly and noisy. People were enjoying themselves, and Topher found it hard not to, despite his fears for Carl. He felt like a traitor, then remembered it was for the best. He ought to look cheerful. His mother was still watching him quite closely. As they walked onto the barge, it dipped and rocked, plunging ibis-headed Thoth and jackal-headed Anubis into the muddy waters, for their images covered the sides, and the black and white eye of Horus glared from the prow. Happy, the river god, flew from the gaudy sail, a rare god with a human face. The gods were everywhere. The gods decide. Everybody said so. Everybody accepted it. Then why couldn't he? Because of a cat called Car. How much longer before they got going? For a moment his worries came to the fore, then noticing his mother looking at him, he pointed to the strange-looking person in front of them. "Is that a man or a woman?" he mouthed. She shook her head, laughed. He laughed. The barge shook with laughter, and his mother pointed out a harpist just boarding, and other musicians. A short while afterwards they started to tune their instruments, and a high-pitched voice sang praises to Happy. Surely they must set sail soon, he asked his mother. She pointed to slaves on the bank, still holding fast the ropes, and to other people only just coming into the harbour. But at last the latecomers were boarding, lifting their long robes so as not to trip over them, holding on to their elaborate wigs because of the stiff breeze. Laughing loudly, they greeted friends and accepted offers of wine from the huge pitchers which stood at each end of the deck. Surely they were the last. More singers now heaped praise on their river god. The music grew louder. Surely now they were ready. But the glistening stays still held fast the ropes, and the gangplank stayed in place. Now the whine of flutes, the clatter of castanets, and the raucous shouts of revellers filled Topher's ears, drowning his thoughts. But there was another sound which brought them back to the surface. The wail of cats, calling for baskets and bags, and luckier ones from the ends of leads, for every family aboard seemed to have brought one as a gift to the goddess. Except one, of course. Theirs had gone before. Car, I'm coming to get you. Topher willed his thoughts to his cats. Move along, down below, some of you, please, an official roared. Come along, Topher. Grasping his arms, Ty made her way towards some steps, leading, he supposed, to cabins below. Then someone thrust a goblet of wine in her hand. Ty! Sherry! Ty greeted her friend and took a gulp, and a few minutes later seemed to have forgotten him. Hanging back, he saw her going down the steps. Looking over her shoulder, looking for him, he supposed, but then the barge lurched and she was struggling to keep her balance, splashing wine over her friend. He took his chance and headed for the bows. He wasn't exactly alone. Sailors were busy checking the sail, but at least he could think, and he could watch the bank. But it seemed ages before the slaves on shore started to unwind the ropes from the bollards, winding them around their arms. Then, "Look out!" a shout made him step back, just in time, as a rope came flying and landed near his feet. More followed. Then the overseer roared, and the oarsman behind him heaved. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Slowly the barge swung away from the boarding stage. They were off. He was on his way.